Plastic, metal, resin, the three most common materials used for models in the tabletop miniature game. But how do we work with all three of them? Let's discuss it. Welcome hobbyists to Hobby Time episode 8, where today we're discussing the three major types of materials you'll run into when you buy models. Plastics, resins, metals. They're the three most common used materials in the tabletop miniature scene. Now, every company has a different mandate of which ones they like. Some companies like only metal models. Some companies prefer resin models. Some companies only prefer plastics. And let me tell you, there's plenty of different plastics out there. From the plastics that Games Workshop uses, hard PVC plastic, the soft plastic and hard plastic that Star Wars Legion comes in. There's plenty of different plastics. Resins are the same way, as they come in a different style of resins, as every company has their own unique resins. For instance, Warlord Games has their own unique resin they like to call Warlord resin. And then metal is metal. And there's not really much change about it. Metal is metal. Now, I do think that most models you'll see today are either resin or plastic. Not many companies, I think, want to put stuff in metal, because metal is the most expensive material to utilize in this hobby, where resin and plastic are the cheaper options. But I think they all have their uses. So let's discuss each one and how to prep each one. So the easiest is going to be plastic. So plastic prep is just simply cutting away off the sprue, cleaning the mold lines from the model, taking plastic glue and sticking the pieces together. Once the plastic glue hardens, you are good to prime and you are good to go. It's as easy as that. There's no extra steps or anything like that. Resin has a few extra steps attached to it. Now, I would like to also mention that some plastics don't take plastic glue so well. Working on like Star Wars Legion models, you might want to use super glue, and you might want to use other types of glue when working with certain types of plastic. Some plastics do not take well to plastic glue. Just an FYI there. Now, when we got that FYI out, let's talk resin. Resin is sort of like plastic. Resin will come on resin doesn't come on sprues. It will sometimes come on like blocks that you have to then chop away. If you're a fan of many other content creators, you might have seen them working on like Warlord Titans, or any one of the Titan lines from Games Workshop's games, or even the Manta, anything basically from Forge World. If you've seen any model from Forge World, you know what I mean by coming on like a big hunk of resin block. Now, resin, depending on the company, can be more expensive than plastic. That's why a lot of people are very happy that 30K is going into plastic instead of resin. Because resin also has a problem. Resin warps very terribly. Because of the nature of resin, you're using the same resin mold over and over and over again. The resin mold slowly begins slipping and it warps your model. So the only way to get it is have to heat up water to then unwarp the parts. Not easy. Second, resin always doesn't perfectly connect. So meaning that the two joints that you want to put together may not connect. There may be like overhang, or there may be like a part that doesn't stick right. So you're going to have to grab sandpaper. You're going to have to sand off that part of the resin until the two parts can connect. Another reason people don't like big resin models. Third, you have to clean resin. That is correct. Now, when working with resin to pull it out of the mold, they have a release agent over resin. If you do not clean that release agent off, when you go to prime your models, everything will be fine, but over time, the release agent is going to eat through the primer and then eat through the paint. It doesn't look good when the release agent's eating through your paint. And also, the release agent doesn't sometimes always take primer too well either. Now, it's very easy to get rid of your release agent. You're just going to take some warm water, not super hot water, because super hot will start warping the resin, but some warm water and some soft dish soap like Dawn, mix those together and then take a toothbrush and rub over the entirety of the model until you get that release agent off. Now, 3D printed resin models, some of the 3D printers will actually clean the resin themselves because they have to cure it a very specific way. So they're very nice about making sure that when they send it, it's already been cleaned. Much like Warlord, much like Combat Storm is doing, their models are already coming off to you, already cleaned, and you don't even have to do the cleaning step that you might have to do with other resin models because their resin models are 3D printed. So they have to go through a completely different curing process for those models. If you're a 3D printer from resin, you completely understand. But resin is very nice because a lot of companies do say it's cheaper. That can get a lot more detail in resin. It's just that you're gonna have to clean the models. You're gonna have to de-warp parts. You may have to sand to get your parts together. And you may find some extreme warping bits. Basically the resin slipping in the mold and the fact that the molds are just overused. Very common of seeing this is in Forge World. Games Workshop's subsidiary that sells all their resin kits. You will find quite a lot of the issues with resin. Still, a great material to work with, just understand it's a little more complex than plastic. And also do remember, if you are sanding, cutting, or working with large chunks of resin, wear a respirator. Unlike plastic, you're gonna have resin dust floating around the air. Much like when working with an airbrush, you wanna wear a respirator so you don't catch a bunch of resin dust into your lungs. It's not healthy for you and not safe for you. So if you're working with big chunks of resin and you have to sand them and you have to cut them and you have to work with them, wear a respirator when working through that so that you can, of course, just protect your lungs. And then finally, metal. Probably just like plastic, it's one of the easier materials to work with. Metal does happen to sometimes bend, but if you lightly push it back into place, you'll be fine. Now, do be cautious when pushing it back. You don't push it too far that you bend and break the metal. But you just want to lightly push it back into place. Metal does have mold lines as well. I did forget resin. Resin will also have mold lines as well. Make sure you scrape and cut those away. Metal, same thing. And then metal after that, all you need to do is prime it. But those are the 3 types of models you'll encounter. And in my opinion, I prefer the plastic models, and I will go with resin because Warlord Games does move a lot of stuff out of resin, and I do support that company. I haven't worked a lot with metal, but it doesn't seem overly harder than plastic and resin. I just think you don't see a lot of metal these days. You see a lot more of plastic resin because metal is the most expensive material to work with and to create models out of. So you're probably gonna see more resin and plastic. Resin is the more complicated material to work with because you have to clean it, you're gonna have to de-warp it, you might have to sand it, you might have to do other things to just get the model together. Warlord Games' planes aren't too bad at this, but you'll have to scrape away the mold lines where it's in the model. You might have to slightly get it warm to bend it back into place. PVC, some plastics do have the bending problem as well. PVC plastic and the soft plastic that Legion is made out of do bend sometimes. It's easy enough, just like resin. You dunk it in hot water, then you bend it back into shape, you let it cool, and then it will be solid once again and will not bend unless you happen to bend it yourself. Which then, by the way, might break your plastic. And plastic is probably the most common, and I really do like plastic. Most of all, everything I work in is plastic in some way or another, whether it's soft, PVC, or traditional plastic. Let me know down in the comments which material type you paint the most or seen the most or collect the most of. Which do you prefer, which do you hate the most to work with? Let me know all of that down in the comments. While you're letting me know that down in the comments, do make sure to like the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and make sure to ring the bell so you get notified when my videos go live for you. And we'll see you here next time on Mama Dragon's Miniatures.